WBSM presents The Ken Pittman Show. Streaming live on WBSM.com and the WBSM app. Call 508-996-0500. Now, Ken Pittman.
I think the scientific term is hot mess, but I'm looking at my NCAA bracket here, and I think that's what I describe it as it's a great hot mess. I didn't even know, John Sapichetti, there was a Grand Canyon school.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that. Why not? I mean, there's Oakland, which is in Michigan, not California. So, we find out something new about a lot of these universities and colleges every March that, where is that and whoever went there? But they're finding ways to win, and this is what always makes the tournament kind of fun to watch.
I even filled out the bracket, and it's Oakland, I noticed, but I didn't notice Grand Canyon because I just didn't pay attention to what I thought was yet another sacrificial lamb, and I should know better. This stuff happens every year.
The only thing about Grand Canyon, they don't want to get into a big hole at any moment in the game.
Try the veil. Yes.
You'll be here all week.
But now I should ask right away, who is your champion?
Sometimes the most logical answer is the right answer. I'm going to go with Connecticut. They breezed through the tournament last year. They won each of their 6 games by double digits. They got off to a great start in round 1. They're deep. They're athletic. They can defend. They pretty much check all the boxes. Danny Hurley, their head coach, is outstanding head coach. He's a little bit nuts, but sometimes you need that. I can't see anybody beating them. They're just too good. I came close to that. I got them in the Final Four. I have UNC, Purdue, Houston, and North Carolina. And the only reason I have North Carolina is because they have comparatively the easiest bracket somehow, even though they were the 4th seed. I couldn't believe how stacked the Midwest was. And then you look to the West, and who's out there? One of the teams that might have had a shot, St. Mary's, was eliminated. So Grand Canyon knocks off St. Mary's. Really, the only ones out there that I think can beat them would be Arizona, maybe Michigan State, who's up next. But I don't think they have much in the way of getting to the Final Four. No, I think Arizona has the best chance. That's a team that during the early to mid part of the season looked like the best team in college basketball. I would actually pick them to win that part of the bracket, so I would go with Arizona. Houston and Purdue have such a horrible history of failure in this tournament. Yes. I mean, we go back 40 years with Houston. They had Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler on the same team, and they couldn't beat NC State in the final game. Then they lost a couple of years later to a year later to Patrick Ewing in Georgetown. No fault of theirs because Ewing was a phenomenal player both at the collegiate and pro levels. And Houston always looks and Purdue constantly gets knocked out early. If Purdue gets through this round of the tournament, gets to the Sweet 16, maybe there'll be some pressure off them. They have the player of the year in Zach Edey, who apparently will not go till late in the first round, early in the second round, despite his enormous size. It's just that his game doesn't really translate to the NBA. But, I mean, those are the teams that have been on top all year, but this tournament makes for so many interesting stories because all you need is about a 10-minute stretch where you're not playing good basketball. The other team gets confidence, starts hitting threes, like Oakland did the other night against Kentucky, and all of a sudden you have an upset.
Yeah, and Purdue, just to add to your point, the psychological legacy that seems to irk them, they didn't play well in the Big Ten tournament.
No, and sometimes if you get knocked out in the middle of the conference tournament, it maybe isn't the worst thing. Like sometimes we've seen teams that go in so hot that they're sitting on an off night. So that isn't the worst thing that happens. I mean, North Carolina had lost earlier in the ACC tournament. Houston had lost in their tournament. So, we see some of these upsets. And are they really upsets? Because we don't know much about the talent on these teams because, there's so many one and dones.
Oh, UNC, did they win? Did they lose in the championship game of the ACC to NC State?
Yeah, I believe so. I know they had lost NC State in the tournament. So this isn't the classic North Carolina team with 4 future pros and 2 guys that are going to be drafted in the top 5. I mean, you just don't see that anymore, right? I mean, most of the best 18, 19-year-old players are playing in France, playing overseas somewhere else, playing in the G League. They come to college, it's one and done, and I think by the time they get to the tournament, they kind of play it safe if you've got a huge contract online, and maybe they don't go full force. And then you've got other teams that have 23 and 24-year-olds, kind of like Oakland with that player that scored 32 points the other night, this is probably the last game he'll ever play in a competitive situation, so there's more urgency there. So this is what you see in the tournaments. I mean, long gone are the days where Pat Ewing played 4 years, Tim Duncan played 4 years.
Right.
Bird was drafted by the Celtics in '78 and actually went back for another year at Indiana State, led his team to the final game against Magic Johnson in Michigan State. Michael Jordan played 3 years of college basketball. Yep. You're never going to see that again.
No, I think he would have left in his second game.
Yeah, at that point they said, this guy's pretty good. I think he's ready for the next level. Although I think it benefited him because he got to the NBA as a ready-made player. Like he didn't go through the growing pains. Now, Kobe went right from high school to the NBA, and he had some growing pains. He wasn't quite Kobe until probably his 3rd year, 4th year they won the championship with Shaq. So, I think when Michael Jordan entered the NBA, like when Tim Duncan entered the NBA, Patrick Ewing, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, these guys were ready to go because they were so well schooled in the fundamentals. Now you see guys that play 1 year in college or they play in the G League, and they're just not quite ready to be outstanding at the NBA level. Now Victor Wembanyama, who's a unicorn, 7'4" guy with guard skills, played in France, came to the NBA, and he's already looking like potentially a top 20 player already, and he may be the best player in the league in 2, 3, 4 years.
Right. Yeah, there's so much to learn, but when you're that great of an athlete, it's too tempting to continue at the level when you can get that money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can go back as far as, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Sad his freshman year at UCLA because freshmen couldn't play then. Played 3 years, came into the NBA, and right away was dominant. There's very few guys that can do that coming from high school, LeBron James being one of them. Right away, he was 21 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists per game, and you could see he was ready to make his mark in the NBA. But most guys, they spend 1 year in the G League or 1 year in college. They get to the NBA, and they struggle a little bit. There's always a few guys that step up and look like they can play, like Paolo Banchero, who's with the Orlando Magic, played 1 year at Duke. You could see right away that he had an NBA body and an NBA mentality, and we see that he's grown into an all-star in just his second year.
You're so right, though. It was so much more rare at that point. You had, Moses Malone, Darryl Dawkins, but it really didn't happen that much back then. And I think maybe the way the situation is now, you'd see more Saban kind of decisions. Like, I can't imagine Krzyzewski and Dean Smith wanting to stay in this climate for as long as they did if the conditions were like this now.
No, because there's two things that work here, and it's happening in college football as well. You're recruiting your next class, but you're also recruiting your own players. You have to keep them there, and if someone comes along with a better offer, those players transfer. Like players on teams from like St. John's and Pitt that didn't qualify for the NCAA tournament decided they weren't going to go to the NIT, and the portal opens, and those players can transfer to another school if there's a better offer on the table. And look, I'm all for players making money. I mean, a lot of these players, this is their opportunity. They're not going to play at the professional level. Make as much as you can now. Even some players are making $250,000, $300,000. That's a pretty good start to your life. If you're not an NBA player, you can invest in education, a business, whatever.
You know what I would do, though? I would tie it to a promising letter that you're going to get your degree. I think that it should be tied to it somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be great. Obviously, the people that are now, if the schools are kicking in, that's one thing, but you may have a car dealership in Tuscaloosa who's spending $2-3 million a year on Alabama's top 4 or 5 players. They probably couldn't care less.
Maybe they won't invest under that condition. Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, it's Charlie Baker has his hands. He has his. Wow, I don't envy his job.
No, although he's making about $6-7 million a year.
Money's not bad.
Okay with that. No, not bad at all. Look at the former governor who's now running the NCAA, and the former mayor of Boston is running the NHL Players Association. Right. So they did pretty well for themselves after having leadership positions in the state of Massachusetts. So, yeah, you could tie certain things in, but then you know what's going to happen? It's going to go back to the Supreme Court. They'll rule on it and say, no, that's unconstitutional. So a lot is at stake. It's just which teams, which coaches especially can adapt to this. We see John Calipari got knocked out in the first round. I believe he's 1-4 in his last 5 tournament games, and he's talking about he may have to do things differently. Maybe keep some older players, although I believe he had 2 seniors starting that night, so maybe he's just, talking out of school at this point. But, it's interesting how college basketball is right now. College football is flourishing because we know the players so much more. We see them every week. The regular season means so much because, next year there'll be 12 teams in the tournament. In the past, there's only been 4. So we kind of get an idea of who these players are, especially the quarterbacks. As we talk about all these quarterbacks that are going into the draft this year, we've all seen them play, many on the biggest stage, like, J.J. McCarthy won the national championship.
Yep.
Michael Penix from Washington was the runner-up. But, Drake May didn't have a great year at North Carolina, but we knew about him. The year before, Caleb Williams won the Heisman Trophy. So we already know these guys. With college basketball players, it's like, who are these people?
Right. So, John, it is a very difficult time, I think, to because I think they're going to lose what made them popular. The elimination of the Pac-10 and all these, not only are players going into portals, but now teams are kind of going into their own portal. And it started back with the destruction of the Big East football that we saw. But it's really I don't know, to do away with longtime rivals, which is happening in some cases. I just don't know if that's going to benefit the NCAA. Eventually, I think it catches up to them that they went in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it next year, the Pac-12 will be gone. I think you'll have Oregon playing Michigan or Oregon playing Ohio State. Look, they've had some non-conference games against each other in the past. I remember Oregon going to Ohio State and beating the Buckeyes, I think, about 4 years ago, which was an impressive win. If the quality of play is still at a high level, I think fans are still going to be invested in this. But, hopefully we never see the day we don't see Ohio State, Michigan once a year in football, or we don't see Duke, North Carolina 2 to 3 times a year, college basketball. Like, those are the rivalries that really kind of cover the sport. But we're in a unique situation here, Ken, because our neck of the woods, make a case, college hockey is the biggest of the collegiate sports. You still have the bean pot. The teams at BC, BU, Northeastern are all like national contenders. Mm-hmm. We don't get as involved with football or basketball. We're both of the same age, so we remember Doug Flutie and how good BC was.
Oh, yeah.
Made it all the way to number 5 in 1984. BC's basketball program, I believe they got to the Elite 8 one year. They were always in competition.
With Curley, right? Wasn't when Curley was there?
Yeah, Curley was outstanding. Yeah, outstanding, yeah.
Beat North Carolina and Indiana in the same tourney.
Yeah, they did. And then they ended up losing the Elite 8. I can't remember who that was, too. That was like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But they were always in play. Now, BC's basketball program, okay, they've made it to the NIT. The football program, if they win 6 wins, it's considered a successful season. So, we don't really get into the teeth of college.
They're just at a great disadvantage being in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Because the academic students are more likely to want to go to North Carolina and Duke and stay closer to home than up to Boston. There's not, Boston doesn't really put up a lot of great teams. Where these two teams, UNC and Duke, occasionally you get national champions in basketball, football. They're at least more competitive, I think, than BC, or as competitive without having to go north.
Right, exactly. And then you get powers in the ACC in football like Florida State and Clemson, and they're looking to get out because the ACC's football brand is far behind the SEC and the Big Ten, right? I mean, those are the 2 major conferences, so they're trying to find their niche there. So, yeah, collegiate sports is at a really, really interesting time right now.
I do agree that Florida State, based on the team they were going to put on the field, should have been denied, even though they were undefeated. But it's a rare scenario where I would agree with it, although it fell in that category. I thought they made the right decision. Yeah,
I mean, because, the next time out in the bowl game, Georgia beat them by 100 points. Almost as badly as Georgia beat TCU the year before. I still think Georgia was probably the best team in college football last year, although a Georgia-Michigan national championship game would probably have been the best matchup, but Georgia picked the wrong time to lose its first game in forever, losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game, and they got held out of the tournament because there was only 4, and now there's going to be 12, so all those teams will qualify, and you see more of a fair tournament at that point.
I'll give myself a little credit here. The moment Nick Saban resigned, I said, well, if Alabama's smart, they'll go right out to Washington because this guy has a pimp-tight game, and he's as good as it gets as far as coaching. His system, everything is great out there. And, yeah, they did. They didn't even wait. They just went right out and grabbed Caden, and now it's going to be interesting to see what he does. But this guy has been a very prolific winner with a gaudy winning record everywhere he's gone.
Yeah, I mean, they made the right choice. And, again, those types of places have so much money to spend, the TV deals, the boosters. You know, they can go ahead and pay for whatever they want. So I think they did make a really wise choice.
Yeah, and that was the difference, I think, between Oregon and Washington, because I think Oregon had a better team, but the coaching was better. And so it kind of
twice. And, again, you have two quarterbacks that are both going to be drafted mid to late first round, depending on, whose choice it is, because you may see 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round next month. So you have 2 good quarterbacks. Oregon always has a load of talent and a great support system. The Nike money kind of floats their athletic program. But, yeah,
John,
Washington.
What I was going to say is we're going to continue this after the commercial break. If folks wanted to follow you, tell them how to do that.
They can go on Twitter at JohnSapp25, JOHNSAP, the number 25, and we've got all our stuff there, podcasts on full press coverage.
Full press coverage. All right, commercial break. Then we're going to talk about this draft and what the Patriots should do or what you expect them to do right after this. Oh, 500. Let's go back to the line 6 where we have John Sapichetti, who is a former Boston Herald sports writer, now can be followed. Full press, is that what it's called, John?
Full press coverage. Full press
coverage, and also on Twitter, Mr. Sapichetti. And I highly recommend, if you want to know what's likely to happen in sports, I really don't know anybody with a better pulse than Mr. Sapichetti on so many areas, whether it's amateur or professional sports. I just always go to him. But let's talk about the draft. Mel Kiper's convinced the Pats are going to grab either Daniels or May with the 3rd pick. I know he's not been very high on my guy, but I would love to see them switch up with Minnesota, who's really, I guess, hell-bent on moving up. And it'd be really nice to grab next year's first, this year's first, second, and third.
Yeah, the rumored deal was the Patriots would trade out of 3 to 11 and 23, which Minnesota holds those 2 first-round picks, and a 3rd first-round pick, which would be next year. So you'd get 3 first-round picks for 1. Minnesota wants a quarterback, whether it's Drake May or J.J. McCarthy. Right now, it appears that Jaden Daniels is going to go to Washington. We know Caleb Williams goes to the Chicago Bears. So if the Patriots are sold on Drake May or J.J. McCarthy and feel that those 2 quarterbacks are going to be outstanding at the NFL level, then you have to draft that quarterback. If they're not sold on either one of those guys and think that Bo Nix or Michael Penix are pretty much similar to those 2 guys, which I find it hard to believe that you're going to say 4 quarterbacks are all pretty similar. That just doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, there's going to be different levels of talent and what you expect them to accomplish in the NFL. Then, yeah, moving down to get more picks, because this roster is depleted, right, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think you take the quarterback, Drake May. The only problem is he's probably not ready to play the first year. You have Jacoby Brissett. You have some growing pains, but you got to fill out that offensive line, get some playmakers. That's also a big part of this. They're in a mess. I mean, they may have the worst roster in the NFL. It's one of the reasons they're drafting 4th overall. And the big question is, are they in on May or J.J. McCarthy? If they're not, trade down, get more draft capital.
I would take, because that 3rd pick has traditionally earned 3 first-rounders. So if you were to forego the 3rd first-round pick in 26 in exchange for this year's 2nd and 3rd, I think, because you need so much help on this team. The roster's so bad. Let's say you swap with Minnesota. Minnesota ends up with Drake May. It's not. I really don't think you're hurting yourself by being able to not only get a competent quarterback, but a top wide receiver and a tackle with that move, because you'd be able to address all three things in the first 34 picks.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could obviously go with Bo Nix or Michael Penix. The receiver group is very, very deep in this draft. The tackle group is pretty deep as well. I mean, the first 10 picks in this draft are probably going to be quarterbacks, wide receivers, or offensive tackles. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. So, yeah, but now what you're going to be careful of is, if you remember in 1990, I mean, again, I'm older than you, Ken, believe it or not, the Patriots had the third overall pick, and they traded it to Seattle for the 8th and the 10th round, 8th and 10th picks in the first round. They took Chris Singleton and Ray Agnew, who were both, good players, but not great. With the third overall pick in that draft, Seattle drafted Cortez Kennedy, who went to the Hall of Fame. So sometimes when you trade down, you get two okay guys, and you give up a future Hall of Famer. I don't know if Drake May or J.J. McCarthy are future Hall of Famers, because judging quarterbacks is like trying to pick the Kentucky Derby winner. I mean, you really
but the 8th and 10th,
figure out what these guys are going to be. It's difficult, especially Drake May's 21. J.J. McCarthy's 21. Like, we've got to project what these guys are going to be in 3 years, right? So it's the most difficult position to draft in all of sports. I mean, the greatest quarterback in the history of the sport was drafted 199th overall, and the next two guys you could put as the top three quarterbacks. Johnny Unitas was a 9th-round pick, and Joe Montana was a 3rd-round pick. So who the hell knows?
It's true, yeah, because you don't know what the reactions are going to be to the next level of speed and complex defenses and all the other stuff that comes with the NFL, and until you actually see it. My personal preference is, I really think, like Bill Belichick, I've learned to value one thing over the rest, and for him it was progression. Is the player progressing? That's the guy who was going to get a chance in the Patriot way. And if you look at Bo Nix from the time he was in Auburn to the time he went to graduate from Oregon, I mean, he went from the most overrated freshman, although he did get the SEC Freshman of the Year. He was still expected to do far more. His second year at Auburn, not something he's proud of, but he broke an SEC record with 251 passes without an interception. He's not going to kill you out there with mistakes. He just never does.
No, he takes care of the football. I believe he had, 4 interceptions this year?
He had three. He had three. In the third one, the third one came in the conference championship game against Washington in his 13th game, when the player came back from out of bounds. When he turned the corner, he didn't see the player was out of bounds, and he threw it. The guy just jumped back in bounds and caught it. So he really had 2 that I would say were big mistakes. I mean, that could happen to anybody, I guess. But 45 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. He broke the completion ratio NCAA record, once held by a one Mac Jones, by the way. But unlike Mac Jones, Bo Nix may have been the best player on the team. Mac Jones was throwing to Waddle, was throwing to Devonta Smith, and had a great running game, protection. Oregon certainly has a great team, don't get me wrong. But, you look at Jaden Daniels, he was throwing to 2 guys who might go in the top 20 in the first round. You get Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. That didn't hurt him.
No, not at all. I mean, when I look at quarterbacks, I like guys who have to come through some chaos at the collegiate level. And Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in football right now.
Yeah.
He played at Texas Tech, where he didn't have a lot around him. His defense was awful. Most of the guys that play with him on offense, aren't in the NFL for sure. You go back, even Cam Newton, who was an MVP in the league in 2015 at Auburn. He didn't play with an NFL player, and he led them to a national championship. John Elway, who I think is still the greatest quarterback prospect of my lifetime, not necessarily the greatest quarterback, although I have him top 5, the greatest prospect. When he got out of Stanford, he wasn't playing with much there. He had a winning record, but it wasn't like he was winning national championships. But he played through chaos, so you have to learn that maybe the offensive line's not going to protect properly. You're not throwing to future first-round picks. Your defense can't bail you out. I mean, J.J. McCarthy was, in a sense, similar to Mac Jones. He had a great running game, good receivers, not as good as the receivers Mac Jones had at Alabama. Tremendous offensive line, tremendous defense, the best coach in college football in Jim Harbaugh, and they won a national championship, and that's what he's supposed to do. But how much chaos has he faced when taking the ball and trying to deal with, the blitz not being picked up, and then you throw a pass and someone drops it, and you've got to move on to the next play. So these are things that you have to learn. That's why Josh Allen, I think, is a top quarterback. He played at Wyoming, right? With guys that never sniffed the NFL.
Right, and he's so they really chose the right guy, because I feel bad that he's not. It doesn't look like he's any closer to a Super Bowl championship. In fact, their window may be closing up in Buffalo. But he was a good player. He's still a good player. Bo Nix, reason
of the young quarterbacks, I'm a Joe Burrow guy. That's my guy.
Yeah.
Got to keep him healthy though. I just like the personality too. I call him kind of baby Brady. He's got more of a personality than Brady, but he's very cool under pressure. And look, in 2 of his 4 seasons, he got injured. The 2 seasons he remained healthy. He went to the Super Bowl and went to the AFC Championship game. And that's an organization, talk about, that hadn't accomplished much in 30 years.
Brady never really let you know what he was really like. He was always guarded in front of the microphone. I didn't like that.
He said as much. He said 90% of what I say is not the truth. He would give. I'm sure deep down he would look at other quarterbacks and other players and go, I'm so much better than them, but he never let on about that. That's why I don't know how he's going to be as an analyst, because now as an analyst, you've got to be somewhat unfiltered and truthful and be able to criticize, especially quarterbacks.
Yeah, we'll see if he can make the transition. So the reason I like Nix is because whenever all hell broke out in the pocket, he made incredibly good decisions consistently and got balls into like these tiny windows on a regular basis. And I I saw too much to say I don't think he's a system quarterback. I think he's the real thing.
And from what we hear, Sean Payton really likes him, and Denver has a high draft choice. I believe they're at number 12.
Yeah.
So maybe Denver's going to move up to draft Bo Nix. I mean, we're not going to see the first 6 picks all quarterbacks. That would be kind of comical. But this is supposed to be a really good draft class. Next year, not so much. Is this going to be like 2021, where you have Trevor Lawrence and 4 other guys who are going to be on their second team when we kick off the 2024 season? Or is it going to be the 2020 draft where you had Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Jordan Love, and in the second round, Jalen Hurts? All 5 of those quarterbacks are legitimate starting quarterbacks.
Probably as good or maybe even better than the 83 class, but that's,
the 83 draft, of course, had 3 Hall of Famers, and it took a while to break through in the Super Bowl. They did go a combined 11 times. The quarterbacks, there were 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round in 83. The one that I always, surprise people with is Tony Eason went to the Super Bowl as a starting quarterback, and he was drafted in 1983.
Yeah.
But Elway went there 5 times, Kelly went there 4, Marino went there once, Eason went there once, and of course Ken O'Brien and Todd Blackledge was actually the second quarterback drafted in that class, and neither one of those guys sniffed the Super Bowl. But yeah, I mean, 2020 is going to go down as one of the best drafts that we've seen in recent years at the quarterback position, because you've had 2 guys already playing the Super Bowl, and they've all qualified for the playoffs. So that's a really good class.
I think for the first 3 years, Nix will be as prolific as any of these guys on the board, only because some of them are raw and will need to develop, and they won't even have a chance to play. Mm-hmm. But I think Caleb Williams and Nix are probably best equipped to perform right away.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams has the most talent. I mean, I think everyone's in agreement there. I mean, he's being compared to Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers.
He's only 6'1".
Because he always, that's the thing. He's only 6'1", but again, his arm talent's through the roof. He's a playmaker. There's some questions about off the field. Is he mature? Look, he's 21 years old. These are young kids still, but the talent is there. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with these 6 quarterbacks. Michael Penix can throw the football as well as anyone, but he's got those surgically repaired knees. He's also going to be 24 when you kick off the season, so you don't think there's going to be much growth from the time he gets into the league over the next 5 years. And same thing kind of with Bo Nix, who's an older quarterback. So, look,
Daniels, Penix is a month behind him, and Daniels is 5 months behind Nix in age.
Right, yeah. These are older guys. So, Mel Kiper said this is the most fascinating draft he's seen in 46 years because there's so much movement among all these quarterbacks, and it's going to be strictly offensive players, probably the first dozen picks.
I think if you had to suck, this was the year because there's so much depth in wide receiver, quarterback, tackle, edge rushers, cornerbacks. This is a great year for everything the Patriots happen to need.
Yeah, they need to grow there. They obviously tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, edge rusher, and cornerback. Those are the 5 most important positions in football. That's where the sport is now. Yeah. I think this is where Bill Belichick kind of lost his way because when he was constructing teams and when he was coaching at the Giants and the Patriots, et cetera, inside linebackers, safeties, players like Ray Lewis and Ed Reed were phenomenal players. Well, those guys can't impact the game the way corners and edge rushers can on the defensive side of the ball. So you kind of have to segue into a new, different era of football.
Right. So have you watched The Dynasty yet?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, 450 minutes long, which is, over 7 hours. So, there's a lot there. The only thing I'll take away from this is normally when you have a dynasty, it's more about the players than maybe the coach, then the owner. Well, this has been mostly about the owner. He had more screen time than Brady and Belichick. The only other owner I think in the NFL that would do the same thing is probably Jerry Jones with the Cowboys. If there's ever a documentary about the Cowboys, it's going to be about the Jones family. But
I walk away with.
Let's say in 10 years there's a documentary about the Chiefs. It's going to be about Mahomes and Reed and Kelsey more so than Clark Hunt, the owner.
Right.
So now you've got a different perspective here. I mean,
maybe his daughter.
Bulls was. It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be someone along the lines of that. But when we had the Last Dance, it was Michael Jordan. Again, he pretty much oversaw the thing, so it was going to come from his perspective. Yeah. But the infighting with Scottie Pippen and Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause, I mean, that was all fascinating stuff back when that came out 3-4 years ago.
I walk away. I'm not done with it. I still have more to go. But the more I see this, the less I like Robert Kraft as a person.
Oh, well, I've often said that when you look at the three men at the top of this dynasty, Kraft, Belichick, and Brady, that Kraft has the biggest ego of the three, followed by Belichick, followed by Brady. And I've often felt, especially over the last 5-10 years, that it was Brady that kept this all together, right? Everyone says, well, Kraft did an amazing thing keeping Brady and Belichick together. Well, they didn't speak for the last 2 years. They were on the team together, and eventually they lost Tom Brady. So, yes, he kept it together for a while, but not long enough. I think Brady's the guy that kept this whole thing together. He seemed to be the most mature, malleable guy of the three, and he's the youngest.
It's true. I'm of the opinion that it wasn't the craziest thing to say goodbye to a 43-year-old quarterback looking for between $25 and $30 million. He just went out one and done at home against Tennessee in the playoffs. We were not, with that roster, going to win another Super Bowl with Tom Brady and what he had left, and which was 3 more years. We weren't going to win. And he added to his GOAT argument with another Super Bowl by walking onto a very stacked team in Tampa Bay. And I was happy for him, but I think that Belichick gets kind of a bad rap for disposing of Tom Brady. You have to rip the Band-Aid off sooner or later.
Yeah, I mean, look, there wasn't a lot of credit. Although in the dynasty, the first couple episodes, they talked about how Belichick constructed the culture of the Patriots and brought in a lot of really good players, and then ultimately, 20 years later, kind of led to his demise when he lost his fastball. I mean, it was more than just those two guys. I mean, players, especially the early part of the dynasty, get kind of furious when they're told, well, you only won because of Brady and Belichick. I mean, they had phenomenal defensive players who were in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Ty Law and Richard Seymour, Teddy Bruschi, Ted Johnson, Willie McGinnis, Lawyer Malloy. Rodney Harrison's a borderline Hall of Famer. Offense, they always had a good offensive line, a lot of really good assistant coaches. I mean, Adam Vinatieri, who contributed more than him to the first 3 Super Bowls. That's the part that I think turns a lot of players off. Like let's hold up here. Those guys were great, but we also had a lot of other guys contributing.
And Brady's the first to say that, that's what I like about him is he really is a team guy and he's a good teammate. Even though I think he's kind of a phony publicly with his character that he presents, I still think he was a good teammate and very mature and frankly wise especially for his age. I mean, he made so many good decisions for himself and for the team. It's tough to argue with him, but he'd be the first to say, look, this doesn't happen without, all these other people.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, there's different ways to win games. Obviously the people will talk about the 2018 Super Bowl when they beat the Rams 13-3, but let's not forget that against the Chargers and the Chiefs in the divisional round in the AFC Championship game, they put up 79 points. Like, that's incredible against, 2 playoff teams that they beat in different fashion. So, look, as great as the Patriots were during this dynastic run, their teams weren't as dominant as, say, the 89 49ers who just steamrolled people, or the 85 Bears, or, the late '70s Steelers. Those teams were just head and shoulders better than everyone.
You could handpick your team in those days, but yeah, you're
exactly.
right.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, and the 10 Hall of Famers as players played in each of those games.
Yeah.
So, you had the same roster for a period of time. With the Patriots, you had 3 titles in 4 years. Then you had a 9-year gap without a championship, although during that period of time, you were still the best team in football record-wise, and then you won 3 out of 5 years with different players.
One inch from the you were 1 inch from the ground from another one.
Yeah, I mean, they played in 10 of them. They played in 9 of them with Brady and Belichick. They played in 11 as a franchise. 6-3. I mean, they could have been 8-1. They also could have been 4-5.
Easily.
I mean, so many of the games are so close.
Yep. Well, your guy, Aaron Rodgers, is now a Jet, and it's just so Jets for him to hurt himself. And the guy who sang the national anthem was actually on the field longer than Aaron Rodgers was last year for the Jets. And now,
he's waiting. Apparently he's not going to be vice president, so he's going to have to play quarterback this fall.
Did you read the New York Post story that the title of the article was Rodgers vying for VP is the most Jet story yet? Right, because it would be
up there, right? Yeah,
you got one of the greatest quarterbacks in history who's ready to take the reins, and he's going to walk away to join Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which of course wasn't really going to happen. But
you never know with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's almost turned into Kramer. Right?
He's an odd duck.
Anything is believable. He sure is. And a lot of it gets in the way of him winning at times. I mean, his family relationship doesn't speak to his family. He kind of seems like a loner, iconoclast, who I don't know how he handles coaching or teammates or certain things like that. In the Super Bowl in overtime when Kansas City was down 3 points, you remember the Chiefs need a field goal to tie, touchdown to win, and early in that drive, Mahomes completes a pass to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, which Valdez-Scantling turned a 4-yard gain into a 7-yard loss. Yep. Mahomes was upset. Next play, he goes right back to him. If that had been Aaron Rodgers, he would have never thrown to him again. And that's what the difference is between Mahomes, Brady, and a lot of the other quarterbacks, that they have the mentality to just move on to the next play and kind of forget what just happened, whereas Rodgers is a guy who probably still, is upset about something that happened 3 years ago and was someone else's fault. Dan Marino was kind of that way, too.
He's going to be on a pretty good team, though, this year.
I think so. Their defense is good. You got Trayvon Smith is their blindside tackle, who, again, if he's healthy, is a top tackle. Michael Williams from the Chargers, if he's healthy, he's good, but that's a big if with him. They've got talent there. They do.
Wilson's probably a top 5 receiver with the right quarterback, and I think now,
he's never really had the opportunity to play with a good quarterback in his first 2 years, and he has 2 1,000-yard seasons. So, and their defense is good. I think they can win that division. Buffalo and Miami went 11-6 last year, and they have some holes. So yeah, I think
they're going to have some morale problems each following this year. So the Jets this could be their window to win the. I agree. The AFC East could be theirs coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a talented squad, motivated, and again, if Aaron Rodgers is healthy and has got his head on straight, he is capable of 38 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and being an MVP candidate. That's still within the realm of possibilities. He is 40 years old, coming off that injury, but the guy can play the position at a very high level, I still think, even at 40 years old.
So 2024 Red Sox should be number 1 in the fastest to plan their October vacations?
Right up there, yeah. I mean, I think the only team that is clearly worse in the American League is Oakland, and they're just trying to figure out a way to get to Vegas, and they have no fan support. Yeah, the Red Sox are going through, I don't know what, like they've kind of tapped out. I think they're just looking at it like, we gave you 4 World Series championships. Now it's time to turn a profit. Obviously, they've got the Pittsburgh Penguins, Liverpool FC of the EPL. They want to buy a basketball team, maybe in Las Vegas. They're involved with the PGA. They're building a $2 billion complex around Fenway Park, Fenway Corners. Like, they've got a lot of things going on there, and they've kind of neglected what made them all that money for now 20 years.
Yep. And now, I mean, I think Robert Kraft, I mean, people are saying it was Belichick who was stingy. I think he was directed to be stingy. And let's not forget, I mean, this is a NFL owner who brought a 20% off coupon to an Asian spa frequented by cab drivers and custodians, right? So
that's an interesting story that somehow got left out of the dynasty.
Yeah, somehow. So they basically lied to the public. Oh, we're going to spend some money. That big splash in free agency was a pencil dive.
Yeah, I mean, they still got like $50 million to spend. Can only spend about $10 million on your rookie, so $40 million is going elsewhere. I would expect Christian Barmore is going to get an extension. He's right now their best defensive player.
Great player.
Looks like he could be an all-pro type player, so you want to get him locked up. But, they really didn't address the wide receiver position or the offensive line position, which are two glaring needs. They're going to have to hit on their first 3 draft picks and get viable players there. Then maybe they can be in play. But, yeah, where's all the spending gone?
I mean, I do these mock simulators online just for my own entertainment if I have a few minutes where and every time I trade down and I end up with Brian Thomas Jr., Latcham, the offensive tackle from Alabama, or Mims or somebody like that, and Bo Nix. And that's, to me, is a pretty good start.
Yeah, I mean, if you get 3 guys that can play in the NFL, now you have to see what the degree of play Bo Nix will give you. The biggest thing is if they trade out of 3, end up with Bo Nix, and he's a good, solid quarterback, but Drake May at 3 or J.J. McCarthy at 3 turn out to be a franchise quarterback who goes to the playoffs year in, year out. It takes a while to recover from that. And that's the biggest risk.
I agree that is a concern, but if they're flops, you just given up the number 3, where if you're getting Nix at number 34, you still got 2 good players who are going to serve you well for a number of years, and you can go back next year and try for their quarterback again. But I think May hasn't shown the progression. I mean, in 2022, he had a better team, but he was very prolific. This year, 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on a relatively weak schedule. I just wasn't impressed.
Yeah, I mean, there are some reasons for that. I think the offensive line wasn't as good. He lost his offensive coordinator, didn't have weapons. He's got some bad habits. And look, Dan Orlovsky, who really breaks down the quarterback play quite well on ESPN, has talked about that he may have to sit for a year because he needs to work on his footwork. And again, he's 21 years old. Sometimes you rush these quarterbacks in and they're not ready to play. I think you could make that case for, Zach Wilson with the Jets. Like, he just wasn't ready to play. He needed a year to learn. Well, sometimes when you take a guy third and you haven't had a quarterback since Joe Namath 50 years ago, you rush the guy into play.
They might have ruined him, like what he did to Mac Jones.
Yeah. I mean, the perfect situation was Patrick Mahomes. He goes to a team that had made the playoffs 4 out of the previous 5 years. He sits for a year. Alex Smith, a total pro, takes him under his wing. He learns the offense, and he's ready to go in year 2. That's the perfect situation. And Green Bay takes it to another extreme when Rodgers sat for 3 years and Jordan Love sat for 3 years. But when they were doing that, the Packers had MVP-type quarterback play from Brett Favre and then Aaron Rodgers. So, you didn't have to rush those quarterbacks into play. But, yeah, maybe you need a year to learn offenses, to learn opposing defenses, to work on your mechanics, to really spend time to hone your craft. It take time for some quarterbacks. Others are ready to go from day one. I mean, Dan Marino's rookie year, you could just see this guy's all set to go.
Just ready, yeah. Right, you're right. And so I see a little bit of Drew Brees in Bo Nix, but I think the ceiling could be higher for May, could be higher for McCarthy. I mean, May is also a guy I watched throw football 82 yards, and he hit the goalpost, which he was trying to do. I mean, the arm strength is just inhuman. Penix even more so. Penix might have the best pure arm talent out of everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but those are fun to watch. The Jamarcus Russell threw it 60 yards while on his knees. And where did that lead him? That's good if you want to bring these guys to the circus. But playing that position is more than that. So you just have to really look into these guys. Like, are they going to put the time in? Do they have the mentality? Do they have the work ethic? Do they have the makeup? Like when they get hit by Khalil Mack or someone like that, how are they going to get up? Are they going to get up and say, whoa, this is not what I thought it was, and I really don't want to be out here?
John,
it's the toughest position in sports.
We're going to wrap this up with you right after this commercial break, and greatly appreciate your time. This was fun. Hold on just a moment, okay?
Sure.
Them.
All right, we're back with John Sabachetti, and of course, John, formerly with the Boston Herald, can now be followed on what is formerly Twitter. It's now called X at John Sap with 1P, 25, and also full press coverage. And I highly recommend you follow him if you want to know what's likely to happen in sports. He's got such a great pulse. John, Grand Canyon advances, Oakland advances, Yale beats Auburn. Who beat Wisconsin? Who was that? We just
James Madison. Ken.
James Madison beats Wisconsin. I guess that's not a crazy upset. BYU. There's so many upsets here. What's the biggest upset in your mind, John?
So far, I would say Kentucky losing to Oakland. I mean, Kentucky was a 3 seed. They're loaded with NBA talent. They had a nice year. Many of their games, they put up 90 points, so you would assume they just outshoot someone. So anytime Kentucky loses in the first round, especially as a 3 seed, I would call that the biggest upset.
How about Nevada giving up a 22-point lead?
Incredible. Again, we see this in the NBA, but when you've got that 3-point line and you've got so many guys on your team that can shoot threes, I mean, 6'10", 6'11 guys can go out there and nail 24-footers. You can come back from that deficit pretty quickly. You've got a shot clock. You know, it's not 45 years ago where Dean Smith can go in the four corners and stall. With the 3-point shot being so prevalent in all areas of basketball, you're going to see some comebacks.
Some great games coming up, John. I always appreciate your time here, and I want to thank you for joining us this morning on WBSM. John Zappacetti.
Anytime, Ken. You take care.
You're the man. Thanks. All right, we're going to take a news break. We'll come back. Ryan's in the house. We'll get back into some of these other issues that we're discussing, including the attack on Moscow. ISIS taking credit for it, resurging ISIS. You're listening to Ken Pittman.
WBSM and W258DR, New Bedford, a Town Square media station.